Story number 1, Unexplained Creature Experience. Now, before I start reading this story, there was a note that was left on the bottom of the email, so let me go ahead and read it to you all. Tell your audience I'm looking for possible explanations on this. In no way am I looking for fame or to make something up. I'm not anybody to believe in supernatural or unexplained things, so if somebody could shed some light on this, that would be great. Well, okay, with that note out of the way, let's get into the story that was sent in. Hey there, everyone. Let me start off by saying that I'm not the kind of person to believe in creatures or paranormal happenings. At least, that's how I used to be. This is an experience I had about 4 years ago, and I've been trying to explain it ever since. When I discovered the Scary Stories community on here, I began to watch videos of people's real-life experiences. It really made me appreciate the fact that I'm not the only one who's gone through something unexplained. With all of that in mind, let me start off with some background. My family and I used to visit my grandfather who lived on a Navajo reservation. In case you're wondering, we are out in Arizona. Now, one nice thing about where my grandpa lived was that he was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. This was why it was perfect land for ATV riding. So, this took place on one of the many times my family and I went to visit him. We had arrived on a random Friday afternoon, and it was right after I'd gotten out of school. It's there we spent most of the night just catching up and just talking. I remember around 10 p.m., we'd been watching some documentaries, and my grandpa mentioned something I found interesting. He goes on to talk about some folklore that I'd only briefly heard about growing up. Being half Navajo, we have our legends and tales. He goes on to talk about something that's called the Skinwalker. I really didn't know what it was at the time, and I honestly thought my grandpa was making it up. He reassured me he was telling the truth, but I sort of just brushed it off. Well, this would be somewhat of a foreshadowing of what I would see. Fast forward a few hours later, and it's 2 in the morning. This was when I had the urge to use the restroom. So, I get up and do my business, and I'm now washing my hands. As I'm doing so, I can hear what sounds like scratching and footsteps outside. Now, there is a window in the restroom that overlooks my grandpa's backyard. I turned the water off thinking I was just hearing noise, and about 10 seconds of silence pass, I can hear more footsteps. That was when I could see a shadow through the window. Nervously, I walk up to the window, only to see a figure walk out of sight. I did find this odd since everybody else had been fast asleep. So, just to confirm, I go over to my parents' and grandpa's room, and I see if anybody had gotten up. The thing is, all 3 of them had been fast asleep. That was when I thought about Toby, my grandpa's German shepherd. Maybe he accidentally got outside. Well, no, he was asleep on the couch. Well, you can imagine my confusion. We are miles away from any homes, and the nearest neighbors are about 5 miles away. On top of this, my grandpa's land has private property signs and fencing all around it. Maybe there was a home intruder? That was really my last explanation. This time I walked over to where I had last seen the shadow. I'm in the living room looking outside, but I don't see anything. About 15 seconds of scanning the property, I am able to see someone in the far distance moving around. They're getting further away until they're just eventually a faint outline. That was when I thought that it was most likely just a curious coyote. But boy, do I wish that would be the end of my story. But no, it was about to get a whole lot worse. So, the next morning when I mentioned this to my grandfather, he had told me that it was possible. But for some reason, he seemed really nervous with his response. I didn't question him anymore since he looked uncomfortable, and I tried to forget it. That was until a couple of days later. It's Monday now, and we're planning on heading back home the next morning. Still, I didn't want to let that weird experience from a few nights ago scare me. On this night, I had stayed at the house alone while my grandpa and parents went into town to pick up some food. It was my grandpa's birthday today, and they wanted to make a huge dinner. More than anything, I just wanted to get an early start on packing my things, which was why I stayed with Toby. My parents and grandpa left around 3 p.m., and they told me they would be back around 8 p.m. After about an hour, I'd finished packing my things, and I got pretty bored. Around 5 p.m., I was watching Netflix with Toby, and that's when I heard rustling of dirt outside the house. Side note, this is the winter, so it was already dark. Toby started to whine and then started barking at something outside the window. It did make me nervous, especially considering I was home alone. Still, after looking outside, I saw nothing. That was when I figured that he probably just had to use the restroom. So I let him outside and he goes to do his business. I myself stayed on the back porch and just watched. But then I'm able to see something walking around in the distance, and that's when Toby suddenly takes off into the dark. Now, Toby is a very well-trained German Shepherd, so for him to just run off all of a sudden was a bit of a shocker. I waited there for about 2 more minutes, but he wasn't coming back. Left with no other options, I grab a flashlight and I head off looking for Toby. My search for Toby has me going past my grandpa's property and going into a set of woods. You can imagine my nerves are running 100 miles an hour as I'm able to hear the sound of the wind picking up and branches moving. I was honestly expecting somebody to jump out right behind a tree, and that would have been the end of me. After another 5 minutes of searching, I stumble upon what looks to be like an abandoned campground. There is what appears to be like an old Native American hut with markings on the side. As I got closer to check it out, I could hear barking up ahead of me. It's Toby, and he soon joins me. It's here I soon began to get these strange feelings. All of a sudden, the feeling of being watched had joined me. Along with this, I could begin to smell something rotten. The best way for me to describe it was the smell of iron and food that had spoiled. Toby started to growl again, and I figured now was a good time to leave. So I grabbed Toby by the collar and we start walking back. I'd say we're about a minute from exiting this wooded area, and I began to hear an echo in the distance. This grabs my attention, and I stand there listening. For some reason, it sounds like someone is mimicking my mom's voice, which I found strange. Unless my parents had returned earlier, then there would be no reason to be hearing my mom's voice, especially behind me, because why would they be in the woods? Considering I could see that all the hair on Toby's back had stood up, I take this as a sign to run the rest of the way back to the house. However, I did take one last look with my flashlight in the woods, and that's where I could see antlers hiding behind some trees. This was joined by what sounded like a mix of a person and a coyote howling. Then I watch as whatever was out there run off back into the woods. Needless to say, I was left paranoid and confused in what I had just experienced. When my grandpa and parents got home, I explained what had taken place. Grandpa was furious about me going into the woods alone, but I told him it was Toby that had chased someone off the property. This was when my grandpa finally explained what I had questioned him about a few days ago. Apparently, this wasn't the first time this had happened. My grandpa tells me that about 5 years ago, he had a similar experience while walking out in the woods. He himself had been familiar with the folklore, but he never really believed it until it happened to him. This was why he ended up getting a German Shepherd and a powerful .22 to go along with it. Even with the precautions, he didn't have any issues until about a week before we had shown up. See, he had begun to hear footsteps on his property, and he had noticed Toby was acting weird. On top of this, he noted the strange smell and what sounded like radio noise. He of course reacted the same way as me, but he never really bothered to look more into it since the activity had calmed down. With that, he just blamed it on his paranoia. Anyways, fast forward a year after and he had passed and the property was sold. We never did return back to the land and I never did get an explanation for what I experienced. So, I wonder, does anyone have any possible explanations on this? Please, serious responses only. I really can't take not knowing what I truly experienced. Thank you. Story number 3. We forgot to say goodbye. Before starting this story, some of the names have been changed for privacy reasons, and some details were added in order to better clarify and present the story to you. Here it is. Ah, yes, the Ouija. Just hearing that word sends a chill down my spine. Honestly, who knew something as innocent as a board with letters on it would turn into paranoia for all these years? See, I had this experience about 3 years ago, and I haven't shared it online yet. This is the first time I'm sharing this with someone that isn't a family member or a close friend. Now, what exactly am I talking about? Let's begin. At the time this took place, I was 16 years old, and I'd never used an Ouija in a serious manner. I mentioned this for a reason. Anyways, our family had just finished moving to the other side of town, and it was closer to my high school. This new home we had purchased was an old Victorian-themed home that was very large. Well, fast forward a month or so after we had moved in. It was my parents' wedding anniversary, and they were planning on going to a beach resort about 2 hours away. I myself was busy with school, and I didn't want to bother my parents. And besides, I decided I would stay back and look after the house. Still, something about being home alone in such a large home did make me a bit paranoid, so I tell my mom, Mom, would it be okay if I invited my friends over from school? I promise we'll be on our best behavior. Sure, honey. Just make sure not to cause any problems for the neighbors. I'll talk to them and I'll let them know you'll be on your own, just in case you need anything. So they leave early Saturday morning, and I begin the day by cleaning the house. Around 6 p.m., my friends show up with a whole bunch of food. We will call my friends David and Connor. David had brought over chips, salsa, and soda. Meanwhile, Connor had brought over some Little Caesars pizza. Something else I noticed was something that was inside of Connor's backpack. Hey, Connor, what did you bring with you? Your laptop or something? No, man, I brought over the Ouija. See? I figured since no one's gonna be home, we can mess around with it. Yeah, I guess that's true. I guess we could. But I have a new game we can try out on the PlayStation. I think that'll be a little bit more fun. Anyways, we settle into the attic as we turn the football game on and we watch it for the next few hours. After watching the game go on for what seemed like forever, it finally ends at around 10 p.m. It's now we prepare ourselves for our spooky session with the board. First thing we do is we start off with a basic question. Hello? Is anybody there? The indicator stood still for about 5 seconds until it slowly moved over to yes. Interesting, but not surprising since we each thought it was the others moving it. Okay, next question. Are you male or are you female? It then starts spelling out female. That was a surprise to us, so we start with even more questions. Okay, then what's your name and how old are you? A-B-A-G-A-I-L. Abigail. And then it spells 27. We're about to come up with even more questions, but then Connor says he isn't feeling too good. Hey guys, do you think we can take a break? I kinda got a headache right now. We both look over at Connor, and it looks as if the poor guy's gonna pass out. Honestly, he was as pale as a ghost. Sure, man, just stay put, and we'll get you some cold water. Just relax and go lay down in the bed for a little while. So David and I head into the kitchen, and we grab some water and some Tylenol. Once back in the attic, we noticed Connor was in the bed rocking back and forth and crying. We found this weird, but we remembered we still needed to finish the session. It's in the moments before saying goodbye, we each hear footsteps downstairs. This was then followed by what sounds like a woman's voice calling for help. Naturally, we look at each other confused, and we're a bit worried thinking somebody had gotten inside the house. Quickly, David and I do a scan of the entire downstairs, only to find that nobody was there. Well, that was weird, but that was nothing in comparison to what we heard next. We hear what sounds like Connor screaming from the attic. Honestly, it was the most spine-chilling scream we had ever heard. We book it upstairs, and we find Connor crying on the complete opposite side of the attic room. It's now I'm checking up on him to make sure he's okay. Connor? Are you okay? Hey, come on, man, what's wrong? You're starting to worry me here. It's like he was completely zoned out. He didn't even respond to what I was saying. This was when I was worried that he might have gotten taken over. I myself didn't really put too much thought into it, but then I thought about the board, and I'd heard stories about this sort of thing happening. I now tell David to end the session, and he finally says goodbye. And just like that, it's like all the bad energy we were feeling had lifted. It's now Connor stops crying and screaming, and we now question him on what caused him to act that way. I don't know, guys. I don't know what came over me. 1 minute I'm there in the room with you two. Next thing I know, I'm feeling all my energy leave, and these emotions of sadness take over me. I was trying to respond to you, but it's like something was stopping me from saying anything. I don't know, I just couldn't stop crying. Safe to say, we broke the board in pieces and we got rid of it. In the end, we stayed over at David's house that evening, and I didn't go back home until my parents returned. Oh, yeah, and in case you're wondering, we looked into the history of the home. Considering how old the home was, it turned out that a young woman had gotten sick and passed from the flu back in the early 1930s. The house had been abandoned for years until it was fixed and put back in the market in 1950. Now, the previous owners never really complained about anything too crazy. They would mention having things being misplaced or seeing shadows, but they explained this away as natural events. Safe to say, our messing with the board made things 10 times worse. As an update, we did have the place blessed and everything soon stopped after that. By the way, I also moved out less than a year after to attend college. So now, I leave you with this advice. Don't ever use one of those boards no matter how much your curiosity tells you to do so. Story number 4. A Not So Lonely Apartment. I just remembered this story the other day while reading some posts about unexplained experiences. It's not necessarily creepy by most standards, but it did remain unexplained. Back in 2005, I was studying in the northeastern US and was staying in a series of old apartment complexes. The buildings were quite spaced out on quite a bit of land with a huge park in between them. My complex was 2 stories and it featured 2 living spaces, one on top and one on the bottom. My living space was on the bottom floor. So I was 20 at the time, and I was attending a culinary arts academy. Something that I noticed that was off about this complex were all the strange happenings that would take place. I later found out that the reasoning behind this was because of there being an old psych ward located on this land. It's since been removed, and living spaces were built over it in the early 1990s. While mentioning that, many of the people living here would complain about hearing voices in the middle of the night or seeing shadows in the hallways. I never really believed these stories myself when I was first told about them. So yeah, there was a couple that lived upstairs, but they were rarely home. If I remember correctly, the husband worked for a business and it saw him traveling quite a bit. As for the wife, she was a nurse. This meant that she was gone for more than 10 hours a day, 6 times a week. I mentioned this for a reason. Anyways, for the first 3 or 4 months that I studied there, things were pretty normal. Sure, I'd have things going missing, but I would just blame this on me being forgetful. After all, things would eventually show up somewhere else in one of the other rooms. And yes, there were times I heard voices and whispers at night, but I blamed this on the neighbors upstairs. This ignoring, however, wouldn't last forever. Eventually, we had a couple of weeks off from classes, and I had been pretty bored. One day, I went to the local pet store, and I adopted a 2-year-old cat. I ended up naming her Misty after my favorite character from Pokemon. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so eventually, we ended up getting a pretty bad snowstorm. This meant me being in my apartment days at a time, just watching movies and trying to stay warm. Now, one thing I knew about this particular weekend were the couple upstairs being gone for certain. They had told me they would be spending 2 weeks in California to visit family. They mentioned this to me because they offered me some money to clean their living space and feed their fish. I reassured them I'd take care of things while they were gone, and that was that. Well, one day I'd been cleaning their upstairs living space when I started to hear stomping downstairs. This was weird because the only living person down there was Misty. I highly doubt she'd be able to stomp around like a person though, so I did find this weird. I ignored it anyways and I continued to clean. While feeding the fish, I remember hearing a loud crashing sound from downstairs. This spooked me so bad, I dropped what I was doing and I quickly head outside. My worry was that somebody had broken into my home and was robbing it, although looking back, running out there with a spatula wasn't exactly the most intimidating thing. Well, one thing was for certain. There was no car near me, and I could see no tracks in the snow near my home. First thing I noticed was my door was locked just like I left it. But once inside, I tried to look for the source of the noise. I checked the living room, the kitchen, the bathroom, and there's nothing. However, when I went over to my room and opened it, I can see that one of my vases with flowers had fallen and broken on the floor. On top of this, two of my picture frames had fallen, but thankfully they didn't break. You can imagine I did what I could to try and explain it. Obviously, the window was shut, considering it was cold outside, and two, my door was closed. Unless my cat had hands that could open doors, then I don't know how it was possible they had fallen down. Speaking of my cat Misty, she was missing. I spent the next 15 minutes looking for her until I found her hiding beneath the couch. I called her name, but she wouldn't budge. This was the first time I'd ever seen her act this way before. All the hair on her back was up, and she kept meowing as if she was scared. I was eventually able to get her out, but she still looked spooked nonetheless. Well, we were both on the edge, but thankfully, I had finished what I needed to take care of for cleaning. That was one event. Another event took place a couple of months after. The neighbors upstairs had moved, and the living space sat empty. I was in the kitchen making some food when all of a sudden I heard what sounded like crying upstairs. I suddenly got the chills as it sounded like somebody was in pain. This time around I called officers and they showed up about 10 minutes later.
Hello there. What's your emergency? Hi. I don't know if this is exactly an emergency per se, but I live in an apartment complex with an empty living space upstairs. I'm hearing noises up there, and I think somebody might have broken in. Okay, just make sure to keep your doors and windows locked. We'll send an officer over right now.
I call the owner of the building, so shows up with officers about 10 minutes later. As soon as we enter the upstairs, there's nothing. The one thing we did notice was the sudden feeling of sadness and misery. So yeah, we never got an answer to that. I did, however, cancel my lease, and I moved back with my parents less than a month later. One thing's for sure, that place had a lot of unexplained activity happening, and it's safe to say it was because of the history there. Story number 5, Unexplained Deep Woods Encounter. Okay, just as promised, I've decided to share my story. This experience involves something unexplained and the deep woods. I know you'll enjoy it. So back in the early 2000s when I was still in high school, I used to spend my summer months over at my grandpa and grandma's farm. Their farm was located a little bit outside of town, and it was next to a large wooded area. I guess the best way for me to describe this location is by saying it was pretty much in the middle of nowhere. See, the nearest neighbors were at least 10 miles away, so you never really saw people out there. One summer month in particular, I'd been spending time in town, which was about 20 miles away from us. It was a bit of a drive, but I liked going there because of this awesome coffee shop. It was family run and my grandparents knew the owners. Anyways, I was there one morning and I got introduced to the owner's daughter. Her name was Emily and she was a year older than me. Safe to say we became great friends thereafter, and we talked all the time with our cheap cell phones. It was 2003 to be exact, so you know what kind of cell phones I'm speaking of. Well, I remember one afternoon I had invited her over to eat dinner with myself and my grandparents. It was around 5 p.m. and we were just eating and talking. Eventually, we settle in and we watch some movies together. She leaves around 10 p.m. and I invite her to come over again next weekend. I'd be going back home to start school and I probably wouldn't be seeing her again for who knows how long. She agrees and we set up a sleepover for the following weekend. So far, everything seems pretty innocent and nothing scary, but that was about to change. So fast forward to next Friday. She arrives and we spent the night playing on the PlayStation 2 I had brought. As we play, I mentioned the nearby set of woods and I told her I hadn't really explored it on my own. She seems interested and we both decided to go and check it out. That was our first mistake, going on our own without telling anyone. Second mistake was going out there at 3 in the morning. Like I mentioned before, my grandpa's farm was in a rural area. There should be nobody out here for miles. Not only this, but it meant there was always some new place to explore. I was interested in the locations that my grandpa told me to stay out of. He never told me why, but I just assumed it might have been private property. Weird considering I thought he owned most of this land. Well, we grab a couple of baseball bats and flashlights and we make our way into the woods. I'd say it was about 20 minutes of walking through fields until we reached a patch of woods with old yellow caution tape and no trespassing signs. That's weird. We ignored it anyways and we make our way through. Already, you could feel like this set of woods had a different vibe than the rest of that wilderness. It just seemed like you were being watched. Regardless, we made it in pretty far until we realized we were lost. We now spent another 30 minutes looking for our way back. That's until we found a familiar set of rock formations. Making our way back, we noticed this dirt trail that goes off into another set of woods. Our curiosity piqued and we go to check it out. That's when we are able to notice what appears to be like an old dilapidated shack. Not only did it look as if they hadn't seen any inhabitants in a long time, but the place just gave off this general weird feeling. Some of the roof was missing and two of the windows were completely broken out. Well, we started to get closer to it and that's when we can smell something rotten. It was kinda like a mix between iron and rotten eggs. We continued to step inside and that's when we heard whispers suddenly come to a stop. We look at each other almost as if we were both crazy, but that's when it happened. We are soon made aware that we are not alone. We look inside a room, and there are a total of 4 people in large robes that sat in a circle with a campfire in the middle. It's like they were part of some secret creepy society because they each matched each other, and on top of that, there were a bunch of weird ritual-like symbols written on the walls. Needless to say, Emily and I start to book it as we can hear them yelling behind us. Sure, that was scary, but what was even more scary was as we were running through the woods, we could hear loud pops and the trees being hit near us. Whoever these people were, they wanted us gone, and we made sure not to bother them again after. When we got back to the house, we woke my grandparents up, and I told them there were strange people outside on the property. In reality, I didn't want to tell them we had gone into a no trespassing area, so I just told them somebody was outside. He heads out there and checks, but of course, he finds no one. He is able to see what look like torches and people looking around in the far distance, but they never got close enough. And that was pretty much it. I lost contact with Emily after that, and my grandparents sold their property. Looking back on this now, I'm not sure who those people in the woods were and what they were doing. As for the smell, I do have a few ideas, but they aren't exactly what I want to say are friendly. I don't know. What are your ideas? Anyone else accidentally stumble upon some strange people in the woods? Let me know. Thanks. Story number 6. Unexplained light in the woods. You know how they say animals have strong senses and can hear things miles away? Yeah, I hear about that all the time, and what I experienced was made even more surreal with how my dog reacted. Also, the story does start out unexplained, but ends up being explained to me after. The explanation, though, really did send me chills. Anyways, here's some backstory. This took place back around 2004, so my family owns a cabin up in the Montana wilderness, and we had built it a few years prior. It was nice because we rented it out to families who were going on camping trips. Something else to note was that there was no one that lived around for miles. In fact, you had to drive down 5 miles of dirt road to reach it. The road itself was unmarked, and you would miss it if you didn't know about it ahead of time. I mention this because no normal person is just going to stumble upon it. Well, one summer I gone through a pretty bad breakup and I was pretty sad. My parents saw that I was feeling pretty down and I reminded myself about going up to the cabin in the mountains. So I figured, why not? This would give me some time to clear my mind and take a break from technology. After all, there wasn't really reception out here anyways. So, along with my Siberian Husky Max, I packed for the weekend and we make the hour drive into the wilderness. Eventually, we arrived and everything was as it seemed from the previous summer I was there. I settle in and we take the time to work on some new songs. See, I was in a little band with some friends and I was using the time to write some new lyrics. First day or so goes by as expected, though there was one evening I thought was pretty strange. It was around 2 a.m. and I was still awake reading a book in bed. All of a sudden, Max started to bark like it was no one's business. I did find this odd, and I went over to the living room to check it out. I look outside, and I'm able to see what looks like a light in the far tree line. But that was odd. As far as I knew, I should have been the only one out here. Eventually, the light disappears, and I go back to my room. I figured that on the off chance someone was in the woods, they had already gone on their way. As for the barking, Max probably heard a squirrel or saw a rabbit. Fast forward to the next evening, I decided I'd make some food outside on the barbecue grill. I threw on some hamburgers and hot dogs, and I began to cook like the expert chef I was. I'm really not, I just like to think I am. Anyways, it's around 9 p.m. and I have some music on with Max right next to me. All of a sudden, the music turns off and the little light I have out here goes dark. Here's something I should mention. In order to get power here, you needed a generator. I always made sure to bring a couple with me so that I had power to last. Something else to note about the generators is that they constantly make noise, so you can't always hear if anything else is around. I figure it had turned off, so I go back to check it out. Before making it over there, I can hear what sounded like footsteps running off into the woods. That did put me on high alert, but for whatever reason, I ignore it. Anyways, it had indeed been turned off, so I managed to get it back on and return back to the barbecue. Another 30 minutes go by, and I hear a loud pop that echoes throughout the woods. This sends Max into a frenzy as he starts barking and growling at something in the woods. I myself was panicking as I quickly usher Max and myself indoors. As we head over to the door, I noticed that the generator was off again, and only this time it appeared like it was smashed. I didn't even bother with it since I just went inside and grabbed my .45 my dad had given me. Meanwhile, Max is barking and I'm nervously looking out the window. All of a sudden, there is a bright flash of light, followed by even more loud bangs and pops. Suddenly, I can hear what sounds like a helicopter above, so I look into the night sky. Indeed, there is a searchlight shining into the woods below. I now watch as what appears to be like people running through the woods, being followed by what I think are officers. Soon enough, I can hear sirens approaching and a couple of officers' cars are surrounding my cabin. I was scared. I was thinking I had done something wrong. And then after, I hear a voice on a speaker say,
"If anybody is inside the cabin, come out now and don't make any sudden movements."
Either way, I make my way out, and soon I'm having to explain it's just my dog Max and I. Of course, I was confused, so I questioned them on what was happening. I guess it turned out that a couple of inmates had escaped a couple of days ago, and they had been trying to find them. Apparently, they were said to be dangerous. I guess that explained all the loud pops and bangs I heard in the woods earlier. Well, just to make sure I was safe, a couple of them stayed with me, and eventually, the two were found hiding in a nearby cave. That in itself was probably one of the scariest moments of my life. To think that they might have been stalking my cabin the previous nights and might have planned to do something to me, it gives me nightmares. Also, I'm pretty sure they were the ones responsible for destroying the generator, but what do you guys think? Story number 7. I never saw him again. You know, I've been listening to scary stories for a little over a year now. One thing I hear a lot of are Home Alone stories. I think those are the ones that really get to me the most. I mean, home is supposed to be the place you feel most safe. It's the place you can return to every night and just relax and enjoy some TV or a hot cup of cocoa. Though what I experienced wasn't exactly paranormal, it did remain unexplained. It took place in 2013 when I was just 14 years old. I was living in Burbank, California, and it was my mom, dad, and golden retriever Alex. We were living in a pretty normal suburb in which our home was located at the very end. Most of the time, cars would use our driveway to turn around and exit. This was why it was not uncommon to see cars late at night. As for our backyard, you can look into it via a sliding glass door. We had a swimming pool, swings, and fencing surrounding the back. This fencing separates us from a set of train tracks with another community on the other side. Of course, living next to a set of train tracks meant that we were used to any and all noises. In regards to the neighbors, we did have some, but they pretty much kept to themselves. Anyways, one evening I had stayed home alone and I was with Alex watching reruns of Cops. At one point, I had gotten up to use the restroom, and while in there, I could hear Alex whining. Normal dog activity, so I finish up and I go to let him outside. Now, here's the weird part. He doesn't go running out into the backyard. He just stands there between the sliding doors staring off into the night. I could see that all the hairs on his back were standing up, and even his ears were perked up. "Hey, Alex, what's the matter, boy? Did you see something?" He wouldn't budge no matter what I did. I figured he was just having one of his silly episodes, so I close the door and go back to the couch. 10 minutes later, I notice Alex hasn't returned, and I can once again hear him whining. At this point, I am more confused than scared, so I get up to find him in the kitchen. He is once again staring out into the dark backyard. He's just seeming to be lost in thought. Once again, I open the door, but he just stands there refusing to move an inch. Okay, now I'm really starting to get tired of this. I turn the porch light on and I do an entire scan of the backyard. I check the swimming pool, which was empty by the way, quickly open the shed, find nothing, then check the fence line. Nothing at all. Annoyed, I start making my way back to the door. That's when I hear a loud, unmistakable sound of something moving behind me. I turn around and I see a shadow run behind the shed. Alex starts barking now and I soon join him. Locking the door, I immediately get on the phone and I call officers. But let me tell you, the wait seemed like an eternity. Alex was barking non-stop and I sat there continuously looking outside. Soon enough, I see a shadow start walking up to the sliding glass door. An older gentleman with dirty tan clothing walks up to my door and I can see that he has a switchblade. He starts pounding on the door, screaming and mumbling phrases I couldn't understand. You can imagine my nerves as I'm begging the dispatcher to have help arrive fast. Needless to say, he does utter one phrase which gave me nightmares soon thereafter.
"I know the school you go to, Mandy. You haven't seen the last of me yet."
Ow. How did he know my name? Unless he guessed it or had been stalking me, then how did he know? Either way, he then lets out the most creepiest laugh before jumping over my backyard fence. Officers arrive about 20 minutes later and they do a scan of the nearby neighborhoods. The man was never found and he never did come back. Oh, and in case you're wondering, the dispatcher has sent the officers to the wrong address on the other side of town. That's why it took them so long to get to me. So, yeah, there's my story about an unexplained strange encounter with a possible home intruder. Story number 8. Abandoned Building Mystery. I'll try to make this as quick as possible and get to the main bit fast. I'm writing the story in because I wanted my experience to be heard. It took place back in the late 90s. It acts sort of as a warning. Yes, urban exploration can be fun and it's exhilarating, but it can also be your worst nightmare come true. Before this took place, abandoned locations were always a fascination for me. The combination of irresistible and danger, what more could you want? Anyways, I understand it was possible somebody was living in the building, which that's partially true, but it would be pretty difficult to believe that due to the poor conditions. So, what exactly am I talking about? Well, it's this abandoned hospital in Norway that has since been demolished. The building and property itself is said to be the home of some of the most unexplainable activity in the country. Explorers have reported hearing voices such as laughs, screams, and crying, and have even seen shadows in the hallways. Sounded all pretty interesting to me when I heard about it from a friend of mine, so we decided that we would go and explore it. So, after a couple of weeks of preparing, we make our way out into the countryside. About an hour of driving down various back roads, we arrive to this abandoned dirt road. It was unmarked and hidden away by the trees and shrubbery around it. Eventually, we arrive and take the opportunity to have a quick lunch. As we sat in the car, we talked more about the history of the building. Yeah, can you believe all the things that went on here? It's no wonder this place was shut down. No kidding. Imagine the sorts of experiments they must have done here. Ugh, I can just imagine. Imagine all that negative energy here. You don't think this place is haunted, do you? Oh, come on. You know I don't believe in ghosts. That's so dumb. They aren't even real. I kid you not. As my friend and I are enjoying our sandwiches and talking, I take a look into one of the upstairs windows. I see what looks like a woman with long dark hair and a white dress in one of the upstairs openings. Looks like someone already beat us to the chase and they're exploring the building. What do you mean? You didn't see her? She was just there a second ago, I promise. Are you sure about that? I mean, there aren't any other cars around here. Not only that, but who comes to explore an abandoned place like this in the middle of nowhere? And in a dress, mind you. You don't think it was a ghost, do you? Again with the ghost nonsense. Okay, let's see who's right and who's wrong. Let's go inside. I don't know. I think it might be better if we just go home. Oh, come on, girl. We came all the way out here to check this place out. Don't be a chicken. Let's go. Biggest mistake of our life. Reluctantly, we now make our way inside the dilapidated building, even though I was having second thoughts. We're now walking through all the debris, taking a look at everything that was left behind. The paint on the walls was chipping, and there is some graffiti with warnings. There are also still baths filled with rainwater, files and documents, wheelchairs, teddy bears, and much more. My friend and I were pretty interested with the paperwork, so we picked some of it up. Most of it was difficult to read due to how old the documents were. Some of them did have some writing we could understand, though. We found a list of names which had the age and symptoms the person was experiencing. Along with this, there were even some old grayscale pictures that were partially torn. Now, apart from the creepy pictures and calling out to what we had seen earlier, we don't experience anything. See? What did I tell you? There aren't such things as ghosts. It was probably just your imagination, so let it go. Okay, fine. Let's just go back to my place then. Here's when things get interesting. Right now, we're in the basement and we still have to make our way down a dark hallway in order to get to the staircase. We are about halfway down the hallways when we can hear what sounds like screams and even muffled voices near the staircase. This was when I take a look at my friend and she's as pale as a ghost. Yeah, who was laughing now, huh? I shouldn't joke around though because I was just as scared. Now, something I forgot to mention was there was a washroom right next to the staircase. We actually didn't go in there because the door was locked. From what it sounded like, the muffled voices were coming from in there. So, with one last bit of brave hearts, we take a look into the room through the small glass window. At first, we don't see anything, but then all of a sudden, a face appears through the window, sending both my friend and I a step back. Now, no, it wasn't a ghost. It was an actual person, because soon we can hear them going for the doorknob. Yeah, my friend and I weren't sticking around to talk to whoever this person was. We book it, as we can hear what sounds like an older man yelling at us to get back. One thing was for sure, he didn't sound like he was all there. Thankfully, we do manage to lose him and we get out of the building. Here's the strange part, though. We were of course both scared for the next couple of days, thinking about the strange man we had encountered in the building. Well, a week later, my friend and I were eating dinner at a local restaurant and somebody overheard our conversation. He was a police officer and he recognized the location we were talking about. Yeah, you probably shouldn't be going to places like that. There's warning signs for a reason. There's a lot of strange stuff that goes on there and crime that takes place, and oftentimes people will break in, so just consider yourselves lucky. Talk about creepy. What exactly he was doing in there, who knows? As for the woman in the white dress, was she really there? Or was it something more unexplained? Who knows if we'll ever get answers. We never did return, and the place was demolished a couple of years later. Story number 9. The Men in the Dark Suits. Ah, yes, the infamous dark suits, sunglasses, and unexplained sightings. How such a weird mix of occurrences can lead to everlasting paranoia. Well, I'm here to tell you about such experiences. For the past couple of years, I've been thinking about writing this up and submitting it to someone. This is the first time I'm sharing this online, so please understand if I might be a little bit scared. Maybe I'm risking everything here, but I want my story to be told regardless of what happens. Also, I'm not looking for fame, so please keep my real name out of it. I just want to share this with you all. So, a little bit about myself before I get into the experience. I'm an avid outdoorsman who spent most of his childhood camping and exploring with his dad. Meanwhile, all my friends stayed at home and played video games. I would be outdoors. It would always be a new location each and every time my dad and I were together. We visited national parks, canyons, mountains, valleys, woods, deserts, you name it. Unfortunately for me, my father passed when I was 19 years old, and I was left with nobody to go camping with. See, I really didn't have many friends growing up since we were always moving. I was homeschooled, and it was just my dad and I. So, in order to live, I ended up working multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. Good thing was I got a degree while doing so, and I was able to live comfortably with my 5-year-old German Shepherd Ace. With all of that said, I continued the legacy of my dad, and I always seek new adventures and beautiful vistas. Who knew that one of my so-called adventures would turn into a series of unexplained events? With that, you now know that I still enjoy camping and going out into the wilderness. One evening in the summer of 2002, Ace and I left our small home in Reno, Nevada, and we drove south into the middle of nowhere. Now, it doesn't take a genius to know that the Nevada desert is known for all its strange sightings and activity. I myself had never seen anything out of the ordinary, and on this night, I was interested in seeing if I could spot anything in the night sky. So, we take an exit off the interstate and proceeded to drive down this unmarked dirt road. That's until I eventually drive onto the desert itself. Eventually, I'm able to find a spot near a large rock formation. It was pretty neat. So, with the cool February night, I started a campfire and proceeded to watch the night sky. At around 11 p.m., I'd now stepped back into my trailer and was watching a movie on my laptop. All of a sudden, there is a flash of light through the blinds which surprises myself and Ace. Ace starts to whine, which makes me pretty nervous. I go ahead and look through the blinds, but I'm unable to see anything at first. I step outside and I look on the opposite side of the trailer. That's where I can see the mountains in the distance. That's when I can see them. There are a series of bright blue lights flying at amazing speeds. I couldn't believe my eyes. They weren't making a single noise, nor did they appear like aircraft that I recognized. Normally, when planes fly at night, you'll see flashing blue and red lights. However, these were just a solid blue. After a few minutes of observing this, I begin to hear the rumble of helicopters approaching. Sure enough, there are about 5 unmarked helicopters chasing after the lights, the ones Ace and I had just witnessed. It was so neat, and I wanted to see if I could follow the lights. Quickly, I get everything back in the trailer, and Ace and I start making our way back down the interstate. Not long after, I started to notice something strange. In my rear-view mirror, I could see a dark, unmarked van following me at a distance. I found this odd as they were getting really close to me and they wouldn't let up. Also, there were no other cars, which made this even creepier. Needless to say, I put the chasing after the lights on hold and I start heading back. The van ends up following me until a couple of blocks away from my home. They then turn away and head back. That honestly should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. A couple of mornings later, I was getting ready for work. I had my coffee and keys with me, and I go to close the door. Mind you, my back is turned to the street. As I stumble to close the door, I can hear a car approach me on the driveway. I turn around, and there is a dark, unmarked van with darkened out windows. At first, I thought maybe they were going to turn back. See, I live at the end of a street, and oftentimes people use my driveway to turn around, but they never do. Instead, 2 men step out of the van wearing matching suit and sunglasses. At first, they don't say anything, and that's until I say, hey there, good morning. Was there something I could help the two of you with?
We need to talk to you about something that you saw a few nights ago.
Sorry, but who are you two? Are you like detectives or something?
No, we work for a division of the Air Force. That's all you need to know.
It was weird. Why would they be here just to talk to me? That's when I remembered what I saw in the desert. But why do they care? Either way, they want to know things like...
Can you tell us exactly what you saw? Did you take any photos or videos? Have you talked to anybody else about this? And are you keeping any information from us?
I'll tell you, these guys were pretty intimidating, so I made sure to tell them the truth. After talking to them for about 5 minutes, they say...
Okay, look, we strongly advise you that you remain silent on what you saw. And if you know what's good for you, you won't talk about the experience.
And that was pretty much it. I never did see them again after. But who knows? Maybe me sharing this story might shed some light. If anyone has ever had anything like this happen, then please let me know. I really want to make sure I'm not the only one that's experienced this. Before we get to the last story, I just want to say thank you once again for making it this far in the video. Remember, if you'd like to see more, including previews and exclusive content, then make sure to be following me over on my Instagram, @TheCreepyFoxOfficial. Thanks. On to the last story. Story number 10, Shadows in the Woods. To wrap up the stories on today's episode of Storytime, let's go back into the deep woods once more. Here's a weird encounter one of our fellow Creepy Fox fans had. Every day after school, my friends and I would go to this playground located about 5 minutes from school. Our school was actually pretty neat. See, we were located in the middle of a forest. Not really, but the school was surrounded by trees and nature on all sides. Might sound innocent, but there have been times we've gone on lockdown due to bears. This story doesn't involve a bear though. So, like I said, we were at the playground and my friends and I were just talking about classes and the newest Pokemon games. At some point, we noticed it was getting late, so we head over to some vending machines to grab some snacks. I told my friends I'd be going to use the restroom first, so I head over and I notice what looks to be like somebody tall looking back at me from behind some trees. I thought I was just imagining it, so I don't really bother paying attention. Once done with the restroom, I head back out, and I'm able to see a figure walking around through the tree line. Suddenly, the feeling of nervousness came over me as I then heard what sounded like the strangest yell I've ever heard. Well, whoever it was enough to send me running back over to my friends, who had also heard the noise as well. When we looked back, they were already gone, and we were left confused on what we experienced or even heard. I know one thing for sure, it wasn't a tree. Some of my friends were telling me that perhaps it was a homeless. It did make sense, but what happened a couple of days after that was what was really creepy. When we returned to school the next Monday, we arrived to what looked like a crime scene. The playground and surrounding woods were covered in yellow caution tape. Of course, the students wanted to know what it was all about, but we were just told somebody had destroyed the playground. However, none of us really bought it because students were saying that they were being watched while out at night near campus. They would describe seeing a tall man in a hoodie following them, but then running into the woods soon after. Not sure if he was just some random lunatic or whatever, but it did remain unexplained. See, as soon as it happened, it stopped about a month later, and no one ever saw him again.